you're from Africa, right? Do you guys live in huts back home? Do you have a pet monkey? Do you have clothes? Hana, why does your mom wear that thing on her head? Looks like a Pizza Hut tablecloth. It was third grade. I was 8 years old, Houston, Texas. And as we say today, I sat at many intersections: Black, African, immigrant, Muslim. But I never really saw myself on TV or in films or in books. And when I did see parts of myself, it was negative. Africa, poverty, famine, war, and devastation is what we saw. Let's take another one, Muslim. Terrorism, oppressed women who have no voice. And then I would actually go on vacations to where my family is from. This is Khartoum, Sudan, in East Africa. And I would witness something very different. It wasn't the same. There was fun and laughter and innovation and education. There was poverty, but there were also all of those other things. And the women? Yeah, they were moderate. Oh, the food. The food was one of the first things that I learned to love about Sudan. Anybody from an immigrant community knows when you go back home, that's one thing that you look forward to, great food. And the women, yeah, they were modestly dressed, but they were also doctors, and they were engineers, and they were teachers and lawyers, and they were athletes too. And so why was this happening to me? What does this all have to do with me? So in psychology, they have a thing called transference. And basically what it is we project how we feel and how we think about a certain person or a certain place onto another person or place that resembles this first person. So let's take an example. If you see this image over and over and over again, repeatedly, and then you're walking down the street and you see this guy, your brain refers to that image of the image that you saw over and over again. It refers to this guy, and it projects what you thought and what you felt about this guy onto this guy who has nothing to do with this guy. And it also works with place. So if the image you see of Africa repeatedly is this, which is beautiful, but this is the image that comes up every time Africa comes up, over and over and over again. The next time you hear Africa, this is the image that pops up in your head. That's called transference. This is the image that you will think of, not this, which is also Africa, or this, which is also Africa. And that's how a stereotype is formed. And a stereotype can lead to bias. And bias, in turn, can lead to prejudice. And studies show the way a community is portrayed in media is linked to prejudice in the public. So that's what was happening to me. Those kids back in Houston, they were just projecting onto me how they felt and what they thought through the images they saw. They reflected that onto me. That is what was happening. So then I started to realize, if those are the images they're seeing, then that's all they know. So maybe it wasn't totally their fault. Okay, they were mean, but maybe it wasn't totally their fault. Maybe there was something else, something bigger. So growing up, I grew up with stories. We come from a storytelling family. We were told these dozens of stories that my uncle Al-Baghir just has in his head. He memorized them. He was handed down stories from my great-grandmother. And there were stories about, ghouls, fairy tales, witches, and I just loved them. Loved it. And I also loved radio. Radio is also very big from where I come from. That's how you know what time it is. That's how, you get all your information. And I fell in love with radio because of its intimacy. You feel like that person coming out of the radio is talking to you and you only. And so it just makes sense that I turned out to be somebody who told stories on the radio, which is today called a radio journalist. And so as I got into telling stories on radio and into my journalism, all kinds of reporting, I couldn't shake those images from my head, from my childhood, those stereotypical images. And they were still there. This was 15, 20 years later. The same, mostly the same stereotypical images were still being shown in television, on film, and on the news. And I still wasn't seeing myself in any of these media. So could that really be 20 years later that we were at the same spot? Maybe it was just me. Well, UCLA does a study every year called the Hollywood Diversity Report. And they study diversity in TV and in film. So for the 2015-2016 season of TV shows, the portion of roles given to Black people was 17%, Latinos 6%, Asian 5%, mixed 6%, Native Americans 0%. That's TV. Let's take a look at films. Maybe it's better. Film roles. 12.5% Black, 2.7% Latino, Asians 3.1, mixed 3, and Native Americans have it a little better at 0.5% of film roles were given to Native Americans. And the roles that were given weren't that great either. A lot of them were just stereotypical roles. Latinas being cast as domestic workers and maids, young Black men being cast as bangers and criminals. In 2014, there was a study of audiences, and African Americans and Hispanics said the news media does not accurately portray their communities. This is a majority. And so the question then becomes, why? Why was this happening? Things were the same. I wasn't going crazy. Decades, and it was the same. So scholars say, they pinpoint this thing, they say to get a diversity of portrayals and images and content, it helps a lot to have a diversity of creators of that media. That you have to look behind the scenes and draw that curtain and see who's making the media, who's making the films, who is in the newsrooms, and who's creating the TV shows. Here's what they found. They looked at the racial backgrounds at show creators on television. And as you can see, they counted minority in general. And all the way from 2011 all the way to 2016, between 4.2, right now it's just 7.1%. That is television shows. Let's look at films. Who are the film writers? Who write the films? Again, minorities, very low, 8.1% minority. And even in my realm, which is news, the numbers are still not that different. People of color made up just 16% of newsrooms in 2016. That is not far from now. And if we look at the population, we're near a point where we are going to have a, quote, minority majority in this country. So think about that. There's a discrepancy between the numbers of people of color in this country and the numbers of people of color in media. And it's been like that for decades. So as I got to do more stories, I knew that I was drawn to certain kinds of stories about culture and immigration. And so one of my first stories that I did for the station that I currently work at, this is called the Immigration Station at Angel Island on San Francisco Bay. And so it was a story about this station. It was the first entry point for Chinese immigrants in the 1880s. That's when the Chinese Exclusion Act was enacted. My second ever story in this station was about the relationship between African immigrants and African Americans. My third story was about a new progressive Muslim movement that was being started by American women. So the same intersections that I was teased about when I was little, I was exploring as an adult through my journalism. I was able to tell stories that are a little different from what folks were used to. I was able to bring my perspective and show something different. I was able to do that because I was at the table. I was in the newsroom. I was writing the news. I was editing the news. I was out reporting. I was a part of the decision making. Everything from creating the whole plan for news coverage to something small like, you know, that's not how you pronounce that name because I speak the language. Let's change it. Or those people from the village that we're talking about, they don't really dress like that because I'm from that village. Being in the room is important. It gives you a say, and it gives you power. Because if one group of people is telling all our stories, if one group of people is creating all of our narratives on our behalf, as well-meaning as they may be, that story cannot be complete. And the only way it can be complete is if more of us are at the table and in those rooms. And that can be in the form of you going to journalism school, which is a big deal, or something small, like taking a photography class, or starting a podcast, or starting a blog, or just going out into the community with curiosity and asking people, what are you thinking about? What are your struggles? What are you excited about? Because studies also show that diversity in media makes us more tolerant. This is science. This is research. I'm going to say it again. Diversity in media makes us more tolerant of each other. And don't we know now more than ever just how important that is? I'm going to leave you with this image. This is my mother. And this is from a story I did a couple of years ago for NPR. And it was a simple story about food. It was a food story about what we call in Sudan ta'miya, what the rest of the Arab world calls falafel. And just, it was about the different ways different cultures make it. And so I called up my mom in Sudan and told her, you know, can you please make a plate of your world famous, delicious falafel, and we want to take a picture of you. And she obliged, and she wore her tob, which is our traditional wrap there, smiled and held her plate. And this image was on the front page of NPR's website for 2 days. And for anybody in media, you know that is a long time for an image to be on the front page. Hundreds of thousands of people were able to see this image and connect it to something positive, connect it to something relatable, food. They connected with her. And they were able to look at this picture and not tie it to famine or poverty or war or devastation. And that's just this one time. Imagine if there was more, 10 times more, 100 times more, 1,000 times more. Think of the impact. That can be powerful. And so today, my message is simple. Join me and be the media. Thank you.